Welcome to Just One Q, the podcast where we explore the latest ideas in workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion in conversation with thought leaders and experts. Each episode, a guest and I dive into a question that highlights their area of expertise. The goal is to leave you with the tools and insights you can use to make your workplace better and more human-friendly. I'm your host, Dominique Atrell. I'm a DEI educator and advocate working for Dialectic, an inclusive workplace learning consultancy in lovely Guelph, Ontario, which is situated on the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional lands of the Chinoochtan and the Haudenosaunee peoples. Today, my guest is Hady Mendez. Hady is a New York-based Amazon best-selling author, Latina speaker, and ERG coach. She is the founder and CEO of Boldly Speaking LLC, a company that is transforming the professional experiences of women and people of color by empowering them with the skills to self-advocate, self-promote, and ascend into leadership roles within employee resource groups, ERGs, and across organizations. With a diverse career spanning over 25 years, Hady has served as the head of equality for a major tech firm and held multiple customer-facing roles in high-tech and financial services, served as a leader and advisor across various employee resource groups, volunteered as an international champion for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women, and served as community school director at an elementary school in the South Bronx. Hady's academic credentials include a Bachelor of Science degree in computer information systems from Manhattan College and graduate certificates in e-business and e-commerce from NYU and NGIT, respectively. She also holds a family development credential from the University of Connecticut. Hady serves on the New York Leadership Council at Room to Grow, a nonprofit supporting low-income families in the South Bronx, and on the advisory board for the National ERG Leadership Conference. Additionally, she holds the role of membership lead for the Elevate Network NYC chapter. And today, what the question is that we are going to dive into together is, how can we leverage ERGs for personal and collective empowerment? And Hady, I have to tell you, I'm really glad to be talking about ERGs on the show because they are so central to DEI efforts and to better workplace experiences for so many people. And also because about half of ERGs are started by employees at any level. It's also really helpful for current and future leaders to get comfortable with the idea of ERGs and to understand how they fit into the mix. So if you're like me and you've worked predominantly in smaller organizations without ERGs, I want to just tell you what you've been missing out on. ERGs are voluntary employee-led groups that bring people together based on shared characteristics or experiences, such as race, gender, sometimes sexual orientation, and sometimes things like professional development goals, for example, reintegration after parental leave. Mm-hmm. If you're thinking that, this sounds like a social club, I think my conversation with Hady will help you really understand the ways that ERGs transcend that, both within the organization and the broader community, and also for the individuals who are participating. So as we get started, Hady, would you give us an idea of just some of the main activities that an ERG might be involved in?
Yeah, first, hello, everybody. And I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And we are talking about one of my favorite topics, which are ERGs, employee resource groups. I've spent over 20 years involved with them, and I have played almost every single role. I've been an executive sponsor, I've been a global lead, I've started ERGs, I've done the whole thing. So what are they kind of responsible for? I would say it's everything. Like when I first started being part of employee resource groups, they had different names. They were called like affinity groups. And sometimes they were like for all like non-white employees. Like, it was kind of a very broad thing. I remember when I graduated from school, I was part of the diversity task force at my first company. And that was just like everybody who's not white is part of this group, or can be part of this group type thing. So there has definitely been an evolution. In the beginning, I would say sometimes it was just a safe space. Let's call it what it was. And that's truly just what it was. It was like, you can come here and like, you see other people that are like you and you don't get to see throughout the course of the day typically. And so it's just a nice safe space to be in where you kind of feel like you're not alone and you're not the only one. And, that in and of itself is kind of a pretty big deal. But over the years, I think as DEI has evolved, because DEI also has evolved, maybe 20, 30 years ago, there weren't even DEI directors or DEI offices at companies. So as the role of DEI has evolved, I think ERGs are considered part of that strategy. And it's like, okay, well, how do we put these groups of employees to use? There's these dedicated employees, they're volunteers, they're self-volunteers most of the time, so they want to do this. They care about it, they're invested in this work. They want to, they're usually anybody that's involved in this type of work, they're in it to elevate everyone. So it's not, I might be part of a women's ERG, but I really just want to see all the ERGs, do well. And the same holds true for people that are members of any ERG. You usually see a lot of cross collaboration. You see a lot of people showing up to support other ERGs members and things like that. So these are people that really care about the company culture, about making sure that everybody feels like they belong, making sure everybody gets celebrated, making sure that people don't feel othered. So then they've gone on to play really big roles. So a lot of them become, cultural ambassadors. They become people that are shaping DEI strategies. They are helping with retention. They're helping develop product. They're helping with recruiting. They're helping with all kinds of things. I
Yeah.
think that is where you see a lot of ERGs. That's the space you see ERGs playing in now, is
Yeah.
a lot of this impactful work. That's very noticeable.
Yeah, that's certainly, like I've mentioned, I've never been part of an ERG, nor have I even worked at a company large enough to have one. But I do work with a lot of people who are in ERGs. And so at arm's length, I'm hearing all these stories about that shift, how, absolutely it may have started as kind of a more generic social activity, but
Taco
now,
Tuesdays and salsa lessons
yeah,
is what we were known for a
which
while.
which is great. But
Yes,
I'm hearing things like, we're shaping company policy, or we're advising on specific
that's right.
issues. We're, connecting and leveraging colleagues across different departments to make change to policy, or we're driving, the company's community impact programs that affect things even outside of our workplace.
That's
So
right.
there are a whole bunch of different ways that ERGs are empowering themselves and doing extra work to sort of make change within and outside of organizations.
Yep.
Hadi, I would love, you touched on it a little bit, but I would love to hear a little bit more about your story and how it connects with your current ERG work. How did you get to where you are today?
Okay, so I think we already said I'm the CEO of Boldly Speaking, and it's my company. It's all about transforming the experience of women and people of color in the workplace, like put simply. And how I got there is I spent about 25 years in corporate, mostly at the intersection of technology and financial services. So like nothing to do with this. But I did spend 5 very important years in the nonprofit space. 2 of those years I served as an international volunteer, and I worked in a prison, a women's prison. And I formed the support group for the women there. And this is important. I guess you'll notice in a little bit why it's important, but that was important. And then I also spent 3 years as a community school director, which literally has the word community in the title. And I was the right hand of the principal and responsible for everything that was non-academic. So I was responsible for like supporting the families, behavioral health of the children, mental health. We started a mental health clinic. We had a food pantry, all sorts of things, parent support groups, etc. And I mentioned already that I've been part of the ERG ecosystem for over 20 years, and I was an executive sponsor, and I started an ERG, and I was just like a plain vanilla member and everything in between. And I would say that as I look across my entire career, and I think about like tease out the common threads, I would say it's advocating for people, building community, and building trusted relationships. Like those are
Hmm.
the areas and the spaces that I play in. And I think that is what draws me to the ERG work. I know firsthand because I've started ERGs and I've been part of them for a very long time that they can be very powerful in building space with other people that share your identity and building a space where you feel safe, you feel like you can bring your full self, you feel like you're not judged, you just feel like, whoo, I could take off that mask now and I could just be me for a little bit while I sit in this ERG meeting, and then I'll go back and do, put on my mask again and get ready for my meeting with my customer or whatever the case might be. And maybe it's a little bit hyperbole, but not completely, because it is true that, a lot of us, people that are, first and few in the corporate spaces, we have a lot of work that we got to do to fit in and belong and, be appreciated and valued in
Mm.
the same way that our peers are. And so it's not a total exaggeration to say that, that's a lot of work. And so sometimes it's really nice to go into a space where I don't need to do all that. And I don't need to put on all these, I guess, facades or, do the code switching or anything. I could just be me, and I could talk about Bad Bunny if I want to say I was listening to Bad Bunny's album this weekend and it was amazing. It was fire. And I'm so proud to be Puerto Rican right now. And I don't need to like explain everything I just said.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I feel like that is such an important facet of ERGs, just that piece of empowerment at a personal level and connecting to folks who have a similar culture and like you said,
Yeah.
unmasking. But what are the other skills that people can learn by either getting involved in an ERG or by leading an ERG? Because I'm hearing, with all of the different responsibilities that ERGs are taking, surely there's like quite a bit of policy related work there, I'm guessing. Like what are the skills that people can learn?
I think it is important just to double click on what you said. It's a little bit nuanced, but I would say ERGs are not in the business of building policy. I don't think they should be. They're advisors, they're subject matter experts, if you will.
Mm,
They can say, I can tell you what it's like to be a Latina woman walking in the world in tech and financial services. If you want to know what that experience is like, if you want to know where to find me, other people like me. I can tell you if you want me to highlight or spotlight the things that are going to resonate with another Latina or a first gen college graduate or whatever the case may be. I can help you with that, but I'm not actually always the one doing the work. There's still a recruiting team. There's still people who focus on developing employees. So like those people, HR functions, we're not trying to take anybody's job away or everybody gets to keep their job. But what we are is advisors. And I
mm,
think we can advise in a slew of ways across a lot of categories of things. We can help with, like I said, with product development. We can help with, when you're interfacing or let's say working with customers in terms of like, say, a customer conference and you want to inject a little bit of, hey, we have the Latino group is going to have a salsa lessons later. And hey, you want to come to this other event that's being sponsored by the LGBT plus community. It's a happy hour if you want to come by later. And it's just like, we can help make spaces more inclusive. That's something that we
hmm
can do. But
hmm
anyway, going back to other things that are related to the connection between ERGs and empowerment, I would say that one important thing I may have mentioned, but I want to spell it out, is that what is super empowering about an ERG space is that oftentimes we are othered. It's like, oh, you speak another language. Oh, your name is from somewhere else. Oh, I don't even know how to say your name. Oh, what music do you listen to? Whatever it is. It's like, it's considered like othered. And that doesn't always feel good.
mm,
So the ERG spaces allow us to celebrate those differences and say, that's beautiful. Come learn what that's about. I'm going to teach you. And then you can know what that is too. And then I'll have to explain myself every time I talk about this thing, this aspect of my identity. And so I feel like that's really beautiful. I think when you take a leadership role within an ERG, that's another level of stepping into your power because now you're helping to build your company's culture. And when you have a seat at the table, then you feel more seen, you feel more heard, you feel like you belong. And when you
mm,
feel like you belong, then you can now play a role. It boosts your confidence such that I think you start to see how like, well, we all belong. And what other meaningful changes can we make organizationally to drive a culture of inclusion where everyone feels empowered
mm.
and included.
This
And
feels
so
like, yeah, this sounds to
that's
me like,
special.
yeah, absolutely. It sounds like an amazing antidote to this problem that I hear about all the time, which is individuals who are sort of othered in their organization having to also bear the responsibility for informing people about their culture or their difference or whatever it is. And when there's not a safe number of representatives of any given culture, the onus can be on a single person to sort of wear their culture on their sleeve or try to share it in ways that sort of demystify or whatever. But what I'm hearing you say is that within an ERG, you have an authentic experience of being in community with people, and then you have a sufficient number of people to invite outsiders in without it being too much to lift individually. Does that
A
make sense?
thousand percent.
Yeah, okay.
That's very, you got it. I would say that, sometimes what happens is instead of educating, sometimes it's so exhausting that you just say, I'm going to say the thing everybody else says, so I don't have to now spend 10 hours describing who these people are and what I did this. I know a podcaster who said he used to watch like certain shows on TV so he could just fit in. And like Monday morning by the coffee machine, they're like, what did you do? And he was like, yeah, I watched the OC or, whatever show, fill in the blank.
Sure.
But like he just wanted to fit in. So he would say, yeah, I watched that thing. And instead of just talking about the thing he did watch or he did want to watch that was more maybe related to his identity, but he just like people wouldn't get it and he would, so it was just too much work to go through all that. But like you said, when we do it as an ERG, we share the burden and it's an open invitation and we want allies there. And we have a lot of pride about our culture or our identity or whatever it is that, brings us together. And so it's a little bit more fun and it doesn't feel as much of a heavy lift or as much work.
Mm-hmm. That sounds really positive. I want to talk a little bit about something that you mentioned in our previous conversations, which is that ERG leaders sometimes tend to sort of under leverage their power or their position within the organization or as maybe as individuals seeking professional opportunities through their experiences of an ERG. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics I would say going on. One is a lot of ERG leaders, they're usually not senior people. I would say like
Mm,
the manager level or below type thing. So not always, there could be some directors. Usually you're not going to see much more beyond a director in terms of an ERG lead, maybe as an executive sponsor, but not as a lead. And that why that's important is because a lot of those people, they're still kind of in the early part of their career journey. So they're stepping into these leadership roles. It's a little scary. They're learning as they go. They still are, they may not have stepped into their power, whatever that means for you. And so I feel like that plays a role. I think a lot of them kind of are a little bit short-sighted in that they only see the impact that they have within their group and
mm,
they're not seeing the bigger picture and how when they cross collaborate with other ERGs, how they're really impacting the culture, or when they're partnering with the recruiting team, how they could be really impacting what's happening across the organization. So I think some people don't see that. And I also feel like a lot of organizations make the mistake of not mirroring that back to them and saying, thank you so much for the impact. Like that information you gave us was like so important and so meaningful. We used it to do this, that, and the third. And now we really improved, the way we do this thing. And I feel like we don't get that kind of feedback. ERG leaders almost never get that kind of feedback. People are like, thanks. And then they run off and like build and do things. And they forget to tell the ERG leaders how important and how meaningful their knowledge was. And
mm.
and then there's one more thing that I want to talk about because it is really important and it's data and measuring impact. And I feel like I could have a really good ERG event or I could have a really bad one. And I won't, if I'm not measuring and tracking what's going on, I'm not gonna know why. Like I'm not gonna say, I won't be able to say like it was our most successful event ever because we had the most people come and we had the most people from we had like 20 different departments represented here today and we had senior level people here and like half the people were allies and whatever ways we want to measure how, something is successful. But I feel like if we're not measuring it, it almost didn't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And conversely, if things don't feel right, you're like, why didn't that feel right? It's like, well, it was the same people that usually come, and maybe we didn't have a lot of people. It was, slim pickings. We did this during the end of the month, and because of that, we got really bad attendance, and we should have learned from the last time when we did it at the end of the month, because that's when everybody gets busy closing deals. I'm making all of this up, but you get the idea is that if you don't have data,
Yeah.
you're missing out on making good decisions and understanding your impact and telling the story of the impact you're making. And all of that is really important if you want
Mm.
to use your position as an ERG leader to transition into an organizational leader. You would never have like a product person or a salesperson or a CIO, not or CE, whatever, anybody, name your C-suite person. They're not going to come in and be like, yeah, we had a good quarter, felt really good. Well, no, they come in with the numbers, with the stats. So we need to do the
Absolutely.
same thing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I'm hearing, measurement. The other thing that stood out from what you said is this idea of ERG collaboration across organizations. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what happens with ERG, and actually, yeah, I would say it's like it's a force multiplier. It's when you bring people together and you're like, one plus one equal three, essentially.
Mm.
And now you're getting two communities together, or maybe three or more. It could be lots. There's an infinite number. However many ERGs you have, that's how many people you could bring together. But what happens is that one is you're just like, now let's say I'm part of the Latinx ERG and I do something with the veterans ERG. All of a sudden, I'm hanging out with the veterans and I'm learning about what they're doing. And
Hmm.
conversely, they're like all of a sudden they're learning about what's happening in the Latinx community. And now we're learning about each other. So now we have what I was talking about earlier, these allies that just kind of organically kind of bubble to the surface. And it's just because we want to support each other. And so when that happens, now you get more allies, you get, maybe more members, and you're probably filling some of what I would call intersectional gaps. So intersectionality is like, I'm Black and I'm Latina and I'm queer. I'm all these things. I'm not just one of these things. And so if I only belong to one group or I'm only attending one group's events, maybe that meets a part of me, but not all of me. But when the groups do things together, it's like, that's me. That in all those three things you just brought together represent me. And now I really feel like I belong here and I feel so seen and it's special. And I cannot tell you the amount of feedback that I get from employees when we do these cross collaboration type of events that say, you know, I never felt like you were talking about me until that event happened. When that event happened,
Mm.
that's when I felt seen. That was the moment that I felt seen. And
Right.
meanwhile, I've been hanging out with them for the last 2 years, and I thought all along they felt seen, but they didn't, not until that moment. So there's a lot to be said for it. There's a lot of value there.
That's amazing. So, like, I want to pivot a little bit because I feel like I'm hearing some advice in terms of within ERGs, what the leaders of those groups can do in order to leverage their position a little bit more to kind of really embody that leadership role. What about the other way around? What about leaders within the organization? Do you have any advice for them in terms of like if we have new leaders or leaders that have never interfaced with ERGs before, based on your experience of how, organizations leaders tend to interact with ERGs, what would you say to leaders?
So I guess it depends if you're an executive sponsor or just a plain vanilla leader. If you're an executive sponsor, you're going to really need to know what's going on with your ERG. You will need like the details. Like you need to understand like what are the main issues of your ERG, and you need to be able to understand the root causes, and you need to become sort of quote unquote a trusted authority on the subject. And you need to start educating other people. You need to be that informed if you are an executive sponsor. If you're, I would say anybody should, let me take that back and say, I think everybody should get to that, aspire to get to that point. But if you're an executive sponsor, you really need to be at that point where you are a trusted subject matter expert. But, definitely everybody can be championing ERGs. That you don't need anybody's permission to do that. If you see the value there, if you see the difference it's making for employees on your team, you should be championing ERGs in all the spaces, period. I think that when you are an executive sponsor, going back to that very specific role, which is a very important role, an executive sponsor usually is someone who's like dedicated to support and sponsor and mentor and coach a specific ERG. Those people, they should not only be coaching and mentoring and sponsoring the ERG, but I would argue they should be doing that for the leaders and the members as well. So they
Hmm.
should be getting to know the people behind the work. So it's like, I represent the Latinx ERG, and this is the leadership team. And if you're our executive sponsor, you should know all of us by name, and you should know what part of the company we work at. And if you bump into my manager, you should be able to say, I love Hady. She's great. She's so smart. She's got a good head on her shoulders. I love how she delegates. She's very creative. She's a good thinker. She's good on her feet. She's a great collaborator. Whatever the thing is, but it's like, that would be a good thing that an executive sponsor could do, is to literally sponsor not just the ERG, but the leadership people and the members that they come across.
Mm.
And I would say the other thing, there's so many things I could say, but the other thing that I think is very important to say is that I've said it already, ERGs are safe spaces. So if you are tapped on the shoulder to be an executive sponsor, or if you are a leader that has the privilege and the honor to be included in anything related to an ERG, honor the sanctity of that space. And by that, I mean, approach the space thoughtfully, avoid taking up too much space. Like, I know you're the CEO, but like here, I guess you still are the CEO, but like, this is our ERG space. This is our home. We're inviting you into our home. It's a safe space. We love inviting people, incidentally, into our home. Like, I think that is universal. Also, every ERG I know loves when people want to support us. If you don't belong to identify the same way as us, that doesn't mean you can't join us. We want everybody to ask questions and be curious and come through, but do so thoughtfully. Check your privilege at the door, and instead come with curiosity, come to learn, come to broaden your understanding, come to really, learn and grow and understand our experience. Because if you ask, we will, unfortunately, sometimes we wait to be asked, but if you ask, we will definitely share with you, the things that are important to us, that are concerns, what's important to us, and what we are looking for in terms of support from the organization.
I love that. I love that. That's just not advice that I hear a ton of floating around. And so I'm really glad that you've put a fine point on that. I think it's a really great opportunity for leaders to really identify sort of those highly skilled people that are doing work in their area of passion within an ERG. So that's a really good opportunity for everybody to win. So, how do you offer something called the ERG Leadership Bootcamp? Can you tell me what that is and why did you start it?
Yeah, I'm very excited. It is a new offering. And I would say it's a space for ERG leaders to learn the skills that I think are going to make them successful. So they're going to build capacity. And the goal is for them to excel in their role. But I would argue excelling in their role means two things. It means literally excelling in that role, but it also means getting noticed, I think.
Mm,
So ERG leadership positions are absolutely a pipeline into organizational leadership. And for companies that are not looking at it that way, it's a missed opportunity. For ERG leaders that are not looking at it that way, it's also a missed opportunity. So I would say my desire is for ERG leaders to use their leaderships, their roles, their leadership skills as stepping stones to get into better roles within the organizations where they work. And I just want to give them the tools. And it's made up of like accountability, goal setting, workshops. So there's a lot of like skill building, holding each other accountable, checking in. So just like continuing to say, okay, here's the goal. What was the progress you made, over the last few days? What was the progress and like notice how you improve or how you build the skill over time. But I would say the net is I want ERG leaders to get noticed and to create impact.
awesome. And are you also training executive sponsors, or is this strictly for people who are within an ERG?
Right now, the boot camp specifically for ERG leaders.
Gotcha.
I like your idea about a boot camp for executive sponsors. That sounds like a fun thing. I'm not really sure how many people would take me up on that offer. The executive sponsors are a tricky bunch because usually they're very busy. They're usually, very senior people at an organization. And actually, a lot of them would say, I want to help. Just let me know how I can help.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not really seeing that maybe they're not. bring in what they need to into the relationship. I think they feel like, well, no one, no one, I never get a call, so I guess you must not need me.
Right.
And I think a lot of that goes back to ERG leaders, a lot of them being younger or
Mm-hmm.
earlier in their careers. And so there's a little hesitancy to be like, should I call them? And, should I schedule like monthly one-on-ones with this person? Aren't they too busy
Yes.
for this? And it's like, well, you got to do it, like shoot your shot.
Yeah.
And, it could be a career changer for you.
Absolutely. That's a great message. And I'm hearing in so much of what you're saying that it does take two to tango, right? You need the ERGs leaders to sort of be willing to reach out, be willing to sort of own it.
Yep.
And then you also need those executive sponsors to have their eyes wide open to the
Yep.
skills and the value of ERG leaders. So I think we've learned quite a bit actually through this conversation in terms of what that can look like and the potential for
Yep.
ERGs or ERGs as sort of a channel into other forms of leadership within the organization. Yeah, so thank you so much for that. I want to take a minute just to acknowledge, the important contributions that you're making to the DEI space, not only through ongoing conversations about ERGs, but in sharing your own personal journey to empower others. So I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your ongoing projects. There's obviously your book, which is Awareness Put Me On, and you have an upcoming book for a Latina audience. So I'd love to hear a little bit about both of those.
Of course. And thank you for giving me the space to share. So Awareness Put Me On is a multi-author book project, and I am one of 20 authors. And I wrote a chapter called That Time I Ugly Cried. And such a sad, such a sad story, but it's a story that needed to be told. I talk about some difficult moments that I endured in corporate spaces as a Latina and a woman of color. But then I also talk about how I flipped the script, if you will. And I talk about how I changed my mindset, which was by far the most important thing that I could do. So I changed my mindset, and that in turn created more opportunities for me. And it's all rooted in self-advocacy and self-promotion, which are two of the things that I love talking about. I give workshops on this topic all the time. And, that's kind of my brand, if you will. So this was all very connected to my brand. And it was a really positive, rewarding experience. What it led to though was that now I'm like, I want to write my own book. Like that was great. And now let's really do this. So now I'm writing my own book, and I am more than halfway through the first draft of the book. So I'm hoping that it's going to come out in this calendar year in 2025. So fingers crossed.
Nice.
Usually it's like 6 to 9 months after you get your draft done. So I'm going to be cutting it very close, but let's see. This book, I don't have a name for it, but this book is all about my unique journey as a Latina to what I would call freedom and empowerment. And I'm writing the book for other Latinas and women of color. And I'm not exactly providing a blueprint, but what I would say is I'm sharing my journey in the hope that it really sparks some reflection in other people, and maybe for them to take some action that could really lead to some very positive transformation. So while it's not a blueprint, I would say my goal is for my readers to feel less alone on their journey.
Hmm.
And that I think is very related to the ERG work. So it's kind of all like very related in that, when you're part of an ERG, I talked about, it's like you go there because you don't want to feel alone. You don't want to feel like the only. And it's like, well, that's why I'm writing the book, because I don't want people to feel that way. I want them to know like, hey, there's a lot of us out here that feel just like this, that have gone through very similar experiences, if not exactly the same. And, there's something you could do about it. And here's
Hmm.
some of the things that work for me. And not all of it
Amazing.
is going to work for you, but some of it might.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note, I want to ask you, is there anyone else whose work you'd like to amplify?
Absolutely. So we've been talking about ERGs, and I'm no longer part of a official corporation company where I can participate with an ERG, but I have found spaces that are very ERG-like, and I wanted to share both of those spaces with your audience. The first is an organization called the Elevate Network. Have you heard of it?
Only in your bio.
Okay, well, Elevate Network, it's a beautiful space for women in corporate as well as women that are on their entrepreneurship journeys. We're a global organization, and I'm the membership lead for our New York City chapter. And then my other organization that I want to spotlight that also feels like an ERG to me is Lean in Latinas. And this is a space where Latinas who are looking to grow and making an impact, we get together, there's circles, kind of like chapters. I started off in a circle that kind of existed called Speakers and Coaches. And then I ended up starting the New York Circle last year. So now I'm the circle lead for New York City, which is pretty exciting. And I am also serving as the associate program director. So the associate director of programs at the national level. So what I like about both of these spaces is that they allow me to shine. They give me a sense of belonging and they allow me to amplify my voice. And that is, you can't beat that. That's exactly what ERG spaces are like. And whatever you call it, I encourage your audience to find their safe spaces, whether it's inside a company or through organizations like Elevate and Lean in Latinas. It doesn't matter what you call it or kind of the construct. I think the important thing is to find the space where you can be you fully, unapologetically, and you get to amplify your voice and really shine. That's the important part.
What a lovely invitation. Thank you so much for your presence here today, Hady, and for giving us so much to think about and for just the kindness in your recommendations. I really appreciate it. And for our listeners, I'll drop Hady's info into the show notes for anybody who wants to check out her writing and her speaking work, and of course, the organizations that she has just mentioned. And as always, I welcome any of our listeners to reach out to me if you would like to be featured as a guest on this podcast, or if you'd like to nominate someone. My email address will be in the show notes too. So Hady, thanks again so very much.
Thank you for having me.
If you like what you're hearing, please leave us a rating and a review or share this episode to your own socials. It truly does help get the podcast into more ears. I'm Dominique Trell. Thanks so much for listening and see you next time on Just One Q.